Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. So, if you think your energy healing sessions aren't working, you might be completely missing the signs. A lot of people quit their journey convinced that nothing has shifted, when in reality, the change has already happened. It just doesn't look the same way that we expect. Today, I want to talk about why we often overlook our own progress. I've realized both personally and through working with others that we aren't failing to heal. We are just battling the fundamental ways our brains are wired to perceive or ignore change. Let's look at the psychology of why our growth often feels invisible. Point one, you can't remember what you let go of. There's a concept in psychology called state dependent memory. It means your brain is most likely to remember feelings or experiences within the same emotional state you are currently in. When you are deep in anxiety, every anxious memory or thought you have ever had is suddenly accessible, feeding off of each other. And here's what that means for your healing. When energy work shifts your state, the emotional charge doesn't just quiet down, it disappears. And when it's gone, your brain has no way back to those old feelings. It's not that they just faded away, instead, they became inaccessible. That filing system that stored them away just no longer exists. I can't remember a lot of what used to upset me. Those feelings are just gone. Sometimes I'll go back and read an old journal entry and talk about cringe. The sheer contrast in how I was thinking, what I was reacting to, and what I was obsessing about, it makes it immediately clear how far I've actually come. But without that contrast, I wouldn't have ever known there was a distance to even measure. Point two, you adjusted to feeling better without noticing. Most people go into healing expecting a cinematic moment, a massive release. The skies part, something cracks open, and you just know something changed. But our brains have a built in process called habituation, where anything new, no matter how significant, quickly becomes the new normal. The brain prioritizes flagging what's new or dangerous, and then quickly stops wasting energy on anything that is proven to be safe or stable. So the moment something becomes consistent and predictable, even something genuinely good, the brain essentially files it under normal and pulls its attention away from it. So the relief that you felt, the clarity, the shifts, your brain stops registering it as something different. It just becomes how you feel. And when that happens, it's almost impossible to recognize it as progress. Point three, the shifts show up in how you behave, not how you feel. A lot of the real shifts don't show up in dramatic releases. They show up in small, almost invisible behavioral changes. And those are the actual ones that matter the most. When you clear out old energy, you're also changing how your nervous system routes information. You're moving from responding out of the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, to operating from the prefrontal cortex, where you can actually choose how to respond. In practice, it looks like this. You get a message that normally would send you in a spiral, and now you just reply and move on. Or someone says something that used to feel like a gut punch, you just now notice it, but it doesn't stick. So you stop over explaining, over controlling, and shutting down. There's no big aha moment. You just respond to the world differently because your default wiring changed. Point four, the brain rewrites the story after the fact. This is another interesting one. People will look back at their healing and say, I just matured, or time helped, or I think I just figured it out on my own. Psychologists have a term for this called hindsight bias, but you probably know it as the I knew it all along effect. It's the brain's natural tendency to look back at a massive struggle and decide after the fact that the victory was always guaranteed. And here's why that happens. Every time you recall a memory, your brain isn't playing back a rigid video recording. Instead, memory is reconstructive. Your brain takes the core facts of the past event and rebuilds the experience on the spot. This rebuilding process naturally adapts to your current emotional state. When the emotional charge of the hardship experience has been released, the old distress is no longer part of your present reality. As a result, the brain beautifully updates the memory, weaving the pieces back together without the heavy emotional weight. The acute survival stress gets quietly filed away, allowing what was once a grueling mountain to climb to be remembered as a natural, manageable progression. Yes, time and maturity are real factors, but don't let the brain quietly erase the actual work, the sessions, the intention you brought in, and the awareness you've cultivated. Energy work integrates so naturally into your consciousness that it doesn't feel like an outside intervention. That seamlessness is a sign that the energy medicine worked, not evidence that it didn't. Point five, part of you is protecting who you used to be. Cognitive dissonance is the psychological discomfort your brain experiences when your behavior stops matching your beliefs about who you think you are. We all carry what psychologists call a self concept, a mental map of our identity. If you spent years identifying as the anxious one or the person who's always struggled with X, your brain works actively to keep that reality consistent with that label. When you start acting differently, it feels wrong, not because you've regressed, but because you've outgrown a map your brain still thinks is accurate. I've experienced this directly in my Reiki training. We travel to higher planes of consciousness and observe ourselves from completely different vantage points. I remember one Reiki journey in particular where I experienced myself as such a vast, expansive being. And when I came back, I generally couldn't reconcile what I had just felt with how I normally saw myself. It was completely destabilizing and took a while to integrate. That's cognitive dissonance at a deep level, and it's part of why people dismiss their own progress. Their brain is trying to protect the old identity because it is new and is still unfamiliar. Sometimes you're not failing to notice the healing, you're actively defending a self concept because it feels safer than becoming something you don't recognize yet. Point six, your brain is wired to find what's still wrong. If you find yourself noticing every remaining trigger while completely overlooking how much has shifted, it's not a character flaw. It's negative bias, one of the most fundamental features of human psychology. Evolutionarily, our brains were built to prioritize threat detection, scanning for what's wrong, what's dangerous, what might hurt you. That's what kept our ancestors alive. The brain was never designed to notice the absence of a problem. It just moves on and looks for the next one. So if you've cleared 90% of a trauma response, your brain will largely ignore that and fixate on the remaining 10% that still feels sensitive. You're not being ungrateful or irrational. You're running millions of years of survival programming. Recognizing that doesn't make the bias disappear, but it does stop you from interpreting it as evidence that the work isn't doing anything. So, if you've been questioning whether your healing is working, stop looking for the cinematic breakthroughs. Real healing often lives in the quiet spaces where your problems used to be. The fact that you can't easily remember who you were before, or the fact that you aren't bothered by situations that used to send you in a spiral, those aren't signs that nothing happened. Those are the signs. Your brain just wasn't wired to show you a receipt. But here's how you can get yourself one. Before your next session, write down two or three things that are currently triggering you and rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. Revisit it a few weeks later. Or go find a journal from a year or two and just read it. That cringe you feel isn't embarrassment, it's evidence. It means you've already outgrown the person who wrote those words. You haven't failed to heal. You've just successfully moved past the version of yourself that needed to struggle with those things. So, if you've enjoyed this topic, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you want to learn more about energy healing, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Remember to tune in, listen deeply, and shift completely. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.